Hello, welcome to Raymond Castile's Basement of Horror. Today we're going to talk about postage stamps. Very exciting. I want to tell you about some other toys from the 90s, like the late 90s, and as I was preparing to do episodes on those, I realized you can't really talk about those toys unless you preface it by talking about these postage stamps, because these stamps are the thing that really paved the way for these other toys to become reality. If not for the postage stamps, we wouldn't have these other toys. So I thought before I look at those toys, I better first do an episode about these stamps. Might not be the most exciting episode in the world. We'll find out. Maybe I'll find a way to make it exciting. Doubtful, but we'll see. So first of all, let's just get these stamps out here. So this is not the actual postage stamp. This is a pen, pen that you would wear on your shirt, but it's about the same size and shape as the stamps. And we'll see the actual stamps at some point, I think. But that gives you a good idea of what they look like. So we'll look at some close-ups of these pens, which are pretty much the same as the stamps. And we'll look at a sheet of the stamps in a little bit once I get them out. But these pens are handy, so let's look at the pens. Here's the story on these postage stamps. So in 1997, the United States Postal Service issued a set of 5 stamps based on the Universal monsters. They made the Phantom and Dracula and Frankenstein and Mummy and Wolfman. And all of them were based on the actual movie images. They didn't do stylized representations. They did the actual Universal Studios movie likeness of each actor. They did Bela Lugosi as Dracula and Boris Karloff as Frankenstein and the Mummy, and Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman and Lon Chaney Sr. as the Phantom of the Opera. These portraits were painted by Thomas Blackshear, who had painted many other Postal Service stamp images. So he was a regular that the Postal Service turned to create the portraits for their stamps. And he did a fantastic job. Some of the best Universal Monsters portrait painting I've ever seen. Certainly on a par with Basil Gogos from the 60s on the Famous Monsters covers. Definitely in the same ballpark as that. These stamps were officially released for the Halloween season in 1997. And this was the culmination of 3 years of work from the heirs of those actors, the descendants of the actors. Sarah Karloff, who was the daughter of Boris Karloff, Ron Chaney, who was the grandson of Lon Chaney Jr. and the great-grandson of Lon Chaney Sr., and Bela Lugosi Jr., who was the son of Bela Lugosi. And these 3, led by Sarah Karloff, she was really the driving force behind this. They pushed to get their parents and grandparents' faces on some postage stamps. That was a big deal at the time, and it still is a pretty big deal to commemorate an important historical figure on a postage stamp. That was a great honor. Cortlandt Hull, the great nephew of Henry Hull, the star of Werewolf of London, Cortland Hull organized a petition drive and gathered 17,000 signatures to help Sarah Karloff in her program to get the Postal Service to create these stamps. And it was a 3-year process, and finally they succeeded, and the Postal Service indeed issued these very handsome, beautiful stamps. Now, they could have done the actors just as themselves, but instead they did them as the characters. And at the time, I remember reading from Sarah and the others that was really what they wanted. That was appropriate. It would have been nice to have the actors' faces, yes, but they were the thing that made them immortal was their film images. So it made sense to use the film image, and it was more marketable too. It would be more popular to have the Mummy and Frankenstein instead of Boris as himself. So these stamps were released in 1997. Now, okay, so I showed you the pens. There was a lot of merchandise surrounding these stamps. Not only the pens were some of the more, I think some of the cooler things, because they actually look like the stamps. They're the same size. And this camera's not focusing on it very well. Yeah. They're the same size as the stamps. And they're more durable. And they're not as consumable as the stamps. You can handle them. But there was a lot of stuff like, well, let's see. These are kind of like trading cards. And I don't have an open pack of these. This camera's not, it's not focusing. Focus. I think there it is, I think. So these cards are like trading cards, and I think each stamp has 2 cards, and I believe it's the character, the monster on one side, and the actor on the other. And you can put the stamps on the cards, and you can display them like flipped over. So you have like half the face would be like with Dracula, half the face would be Dracula, and the other half would be Bela Lugosi as himself. And you could display them that way if you wanted to. So they're like trading cards, and I've got this pack. You see it's got Bugs Bunny on there. I'm not sure why I guess they were promoting Bugs Bunny that year as well. But those are monster cards. And there's a lot of stuff like this. This is a pen and pencil set with an eraser that looks like the stamps. So that little square is an eraser, a rubber eraser. It looks like the stamps. And it's got pen and pencil there with images of, is it just Frankenstein? Yeah, specific to that character. Images of Frankenstein on it. And I'm assuming they made sets like this for each monster, but I just bought Frankenstein. So there was a lot. This doesn't even begin to cover it. There was just a ton of merchandise released by the Postal Service, specifically tied to these stamps. So let's see if we can dig up the actual stamps. Put these back. I haven't opened this stuff in, since 1987, so I don't know what I'm even looking at here. What is this? It's like a United States Postal Service Philatelic Fulfillment Service Center. It's got my name and address, so this cost me $20.95. Did I get my money's worth? I don't know. It's what is this? That's the problem. All this stuff is sealed up. I can't show it to you. This is the horror collection. the horror collection from the post office. The horror collection. Horror, fact and fiction. Your very own horror stamp collection. New mint stamps from 4 countries: Ireland, Canada, Great Britain, and the USA. An exciting, creepy board game, Through the Graveyard. Cut out face masks to scare your friends, plus lots more. Free. A horrible Great Wall poster. Okay. So what do we got in this set? Because these are not just the Universal monsters. These are a lot of other things. Looks like there is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a different kind of a Dracula type vampire, a more Bram Stoker accurate Dracula as an old man, a goblin. What else is this? Kind of a ghost, kind of a spirit, like a skeleton. Some other creature. What is that? A werewolf. Okay. And the Universal monsters. And it comes with this board game and like a skull. Yeah, it's a skull. I was going to say maybe it's a phantom mask, but it's a skull. So, let's see if we can we see this stuff. I hope this camera is focusing. It's kind of acting up. So you can see there that not all of those images are the Universal monsters. And on the back, you can see there's different kinds of stamps. It's not just Universal monsters. You got all these different creatures from around the world, and then you have the board game right there, and the mask and all the other stuff that comes with it. So all this is in this set. Horror, the most terrifying stamps in the known universe. Spine-chilling tales and creepy monsters, ghoulish game and spooky masks. So that's the kind of thing the post office put out. Let's see what else we got. And it's in the original priority mail package from the post office. Okay, here's another. So there better be some actual stamps in this one that we can see. Because I know I bought a sheet of these stamps. Let's see here. They're not in here. I don't know where they are. Oh, there they are. Finally, we got this actual stamps here. Okay. We'll put those aside. All right. At last, these are the actual stamps. This is a sheet of stamps. These are not the pens or the pencils or the game or anything. These are the actual stamps. These are the ones you could lick this. I don't know if these were peel off like stickers or if you licked them. I don't remember. In 1997, they're probably ones that you lick. So you would lick these and put them on a letter, 32-cent stamps. That was the standard stamp price at that time. See so at the top you've got the actors. You've got the actor images at the top as themselves. And then you've got the stamps that are the monsters. They're the characters that they made famous. And each of the actors has a signature that I'm assuming their heirs approved of, that was their actual signature from, autographed pictures and so on. So it's a very nice set. The actual stamps what is this? $6.40 for 20 of these stamps. These are the actual stamps. I'm tempted to see if there's anything on the back of this. Do I want to bother with that? Let's see. Is there anything on the back? Nope, it's just a blank white card back. Okay. So what else do I have in here? I've got classic movie monsters includes full sheet of stamps and official first day cancellation. Okay. First day souvenir item, price $14.95. So we can't really see what's in there, but you've got, now I don't know if it's a first day cancellation for each individual one, or if it's, or what. I'm thinking that must be a first day cancellation for, individual, 5 of them for each one for each, and a sheet of the stamps. So I can't show you what the first day cancellation looks like, but they're in here. They're in that. But it's a nice set. I mean, all this stuff is actually very well made, very professional. It's very slick. They did a good job on all this. They didn't skimp. All this stuff makes it seem like a big deal. That's the thing a lot of this has in common. All these products, they make it seem like this is something really important, really special. All right, so one thing I wanted to show, okay, this is not United States Postal Service. I don't remember what country this is. Maybe Sri Lanka? I don't know. Oh, Sierra Leone. Okay, Hollywood Horror Classics. Here we go. And there's one in the back. So these are we have Lon Chaney Jr. No, we don't. We have Lon Chaney Sr. as the Phantom of the Opera, Boris Karloff as Ardeth Bay, Frederick March as Mr. Hyde. Oh, there's Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. Charles Lawton as Dr. Moreau from Island of Lost Souls. Lionel Atwell from Mystery of the Wax Museum. Bela Lugosi as Dracula. Who's that? Oh, it's Vincent Price from The Haunted Palace. Doesn't look like him. And of course, Elsa Lanchester as Bride of Frankenstein. And on the back, we've got Bela Lugosi as Igor and Boris Karloff as Frankenstein from The Son of Frankenstein. So these are not from the Postal Service, but they were released, I guess, around the same time, and I decided, why not put them in here? Might as well. And I know I've got other monster stamps. Like I've got some Asian Yeti stamps. I think they're from Nepal. Different kinds of Yeti stamps. And I've got other stuff like that. But they're not in this group. They're somewhere else. So that's it for the stamps. But the reason I wanted to show you all that was in the 90s, there was a little bit of Universal Monsters stuff, like in the early part of the decade, you had the Playco monster figures, and you had the Telco Motionettes, and a few odds and ends. But it really didn't seem like a decade for Universal Classic Monsters until these came out, until these stamps came out. These really came out of nowhere as far as most fans were concerned. If you were really into the Universal Monsters fan scene, then you would have heard about the efforts from Sarah and the others to get these things made. But as far as the culture at large, there wasn't like there was this building groundswell of demand for Universal Monsters product. It was really absent. You had the VHS cassettes. Universal did a series of very nicely presented VHS cassettes of all the classic monster movies, and they had really cool boxes, really cool artwork. And I don't know what year those was, but they were like early 90s. But in the middle of the 90s, it was all like McFarlane monsters and I don't know, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles versions of the monsters and weird stuff like that. Oh, there were like action style versions of the monsters. I don't even know what that was called. Some kind of weird action oriented version. Lots of weird variants on the monsters, things that were kind of inspired by the monsters. But there wasn't a big demand for the actual Universal monsters that actually looked like them. Pepsi and Doritos did a lot of promotions with Universal monsters. So that was one of the more prominent things that were Universal monster oriented in the 90s. The Pepsi Doritos campaign that ran several years. So you had that in the 90s. You had that promotion with Doritos and Pepsi every Halloween season. They would have big displays with the Universal monsters and big signage, inflatable monsters, all kinds of stuff. And that helped keep the monsters alive. That and the video cassettes, that helped keep them alive. But there wasn't a lot of toys, there wasn't a lot of merchandising. Then in 1997, when these stamps came out, you wouldn't think postage stamps would be a big deal. But for some reason, they were. They were a really big deal. And because of these postage stamps, all this other merchandising came out. So what I've shown you is stuff released by the post office. But all these other companies made stuff to cash in on the postage stamps. And you had a lot of different clothes or novelties or this or that, but people decided all of a sudden that the monsters were marketable. And you had Hasbro, which owned Kenner, so Hasbro Kenner put out these beautiful 12-inch monster figures, which we will see in an upcoming episode. And that was sort of the thing that bust the floodgates open when those figures came out. Then you got all this other stuff. You wouldn't have had the Sideshow Universal Monsters toys without these stamps. You wouldn't have had like the reissues of the Aurora monster models around the turn of the millennium. You wouldn't have had those without these stamps. And this whole resurgence of classic monster stuff, even if it wasn't necessarily Universal monsters, there's all kinds of other classic-oriented, classic monster toys and novelties and you name it. All of this other stuff that came out around that turn of the millennium, late 90s, early 2000s, that you wouldn't have had without these stamps. I don't think you would have had the Dawn Post calendar reissues which began in 98 and continued through 99. The reissues, those really thick deluxe versions of the 60s and 70s Don Post masks, you would not have had those without these stamps. And if without those, you wouldn't have had a whole other kind of retro trend in masks, Don Post or Distortions or other companies that put out retro masks in the years following that. Stuff like even all the way down through like the Diamond Select monsters, I guess that must have been like a decade later. It was still the same. It was like the caboose on that train that started with these stamps all through that first decade of the millennium, from the last couple of years of the 90s all through the first decade of the 2000s. All this classic horror stuff started really with the Postage stamps. Now, Universal put out the classic movies on DVD with these deluxe documentaries by David Scow and these commentaries. And I don't know what year those started coming out, but they were right around the same time. And I don't know if I can say that the Postage stamps also inspired those DVDs, because I don't know if the years align exactly or not. But those DVDs certainly are a late 90s thing. They started in the late 90s. And I think, generally speaking, they are part of that trend of the Universal monsters becoming cool again around that time. So it really was like a second, or I guess it would be the third monster craze. You had the monster craze in the early 60s, like around 63 to 66 in that ballpark. You had a second monster craze in the 70s, around like 73 to 76, roughly, give or take a year. And then you had, and of course, these don't fall into these years so neatly. That was when it was concentrated, but you still had, like, even in 1980, 81, you had the Remco monsters. In like 1972, I guess you had the Aurora glow kits, but then you had the Frightening Lightning, I think, is 69. So it doesn't fall exactly into these years, but there was a concentration, like early mid 60s of monster stuff. That was the first monster craze. And there's a concentration of mid 70s of a second monster craze. And then there really wasn't a classic monster craze in the 80s or even the 90s. There were a few things, but all the way to the end of the 90s, then you had this explosion of this third monster craze, where you had all this stuff, action figures of different kinds for different markets, like collector-oriented, kid-oriented, masks, clothes, school supplies, puzzles. Like in the box that these were in, there were some puzzles from that era, the late 90s, like Universal Monsters puzzles that were not from the post office. They just decided, hey, it's a good time to put out Universal Monsters jigsaw puzzles. Why? Because of the Postage stamps. So a lot of stuff came out, and that made the Universal Monsters a marketable brand again, and that continued for about a decade. And then we had a lull, and I think we still have a lull. It's never quite come back like that again. Yes, there's some merchandise and whatnot, but it's never been like that. Like the late 90s, early 2000s, that was a explosion. And that's when the modern Universal Mummy movie with Brendan Fraser came out in the late 90s. And that whole franchise, that trilogy, was late 90s, early 2000s. So that corresponds to this. And you had other kinds of classic horror like Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, stuff like that. I don't remember what year the Wolfman remake came out. It seems like that was at the tail end of this, maybe. But yeah, that's probably one of the, that probably came out at least 5 years too late to ride the coattails of this wave. But there were a lot of classic horror movies or things that were connected to classic horror. It If you didn't live through it, then you wouldn't understand, because there's nothing like that today. I was lucky that I lived through the 70s monster craze, and I lived through that millennial monster craze. I wasn't around for the 60s monster craze, the definitive monster craze, probably. I didn't get to live through that, but I saw the other two. And I'm hoping that there will be another monster craze someday. I don't know, just the right circumstances have to come together, just right to make that happen. But who would have thought that postage stamps, of all things, postage stamps would have been the thing that would instigate a new monster craze? But they did. So if I show you some other late 90s toys in the future, and I mention postage stamps, you'll know what I'm talking about. If I say this thing came out because of the wave of popularity of those postage stamps, you will know what I'm saying. So that's why I thought, even though it's not the most exciting episode, I thought I needed to do an episode about these postage stamps before I moved forward with any late 90s, early 2000s toys, because they really are linked. You can't separate them. If not for these stamps, we wouldn't have had all that other stuff. It's not like there was already a wave of monster popularity and the postage stamps jumped on board. The postage stamps were the thing that sparked that wave. The postage stamps sparked that late 90s monster craze. So they're very important. Not the most exciting thing, but in monster collecting, very, very important. Okay, that's it. Remember to like this video and subscribe to this channel. You should see a little graphic down there. Subscribe to this channel, please. And also, we have a Facebook group you can join, a Basement of Horror Facebook group. So you can go there and you can get into conversations about postage stamps. I'm sure you're in a hurry to do that. I know you're chomping at the bit to go on Facebook and talk about postage stamps. So you can run along there and do that. You can also comment on this video and tell me about your memories of the great 1997 Universal Monsters postage stamp rollout. Were you there for it? Do you remember it? Did you buy any of that stuff? Any of the merchandising for the stamps? Let me know. Until next time, the one who dies with the most toys is dead.